Recently, I was reading that Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced that this fall, Alberta will hold elections to fill two vacant seats in the Senate. If you're familiar with the Canadian Senate, that may sound odd to you because, since Canada's formation in 1867, the Senate has been an unelected body whose members are appointed by the Governor-General on the advice of the Prime Minister. This led me down a rabbit hole of researching court rulings, the Constitution, and the history of failed Senate reform attempts, all to try and answer the question, should Canada be electing its senators? The Senate as it exists today is virtually unchanged since Confederation. The Senate's purpose is to consider and revise legislation passed in the House of Commons, and to provide the different regions of Canada representation in Parliament. Because senators are appointed and don't have an elected mandate, the Senate's role is generally much lesser than that of the House of Commons. In fact, the Senate has not vetoed any bill from the House of Commons since 1939. The Senate is meant to act as a chamber of sober second thought, and they generally only make changes to clarify, simplify, and tidy up proposed legislation. However, because senators are appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister, the appointments have often been partisan in nature, which has cheapened and degraded the Senate's purpose. Partisanship isn't the only problem with the Senate, though. It also fails at its objective of regional representation. Ontario and Quebec get the same amount of representation despite the fact that Ontario's population is over 70% larger than Quebec's. But that's not even the biggest issue. The eastern provinces have 30 representatives for a population of under 3 million, whereas the western provinces have 24 seats for a population of over 11 million. With all of these issues, as well as some high-profile scandals, it's no surprise that there have been several attempts over the years to reform Canada's Senate or even abolish it entirely. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper attempted several reforms, but the Supreme Court found in 2014 that his changes would require constitutional amendments. Canada's constitution is notoriously difficult to amend, with most amendments requiring approval from the federal government as well as substantial support from the provinces. More recently, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has implemented some minor reforms in the form of an updated appointment process. Now, Canadians can apply to be senators, and applications are reviewed by an independent advisory board. This has made recent appointments to the Senate less partisan, but does not address other issues with the Senate, such as the regional representation issue. This brings us back to the topic of Alberta and their Senate elections. Alberta is planning on having a non-binding election in the fall to recommend to Prime Minister Trudeau who he should appoint to fill Alberta's two vacant Senate seats. The problem with this is that it runs contrary to the appointment process the Prime Minister has implemented. Furthermore, Alberta's election might be unconstitutional. In the Supreme Court's 2014 ruling, they found that introducing a process of consultative elections for the nomination of senators would change our Constitution's architecture by endowing senators with a popular mandate, and that such an election would require constitutional amendments. Now, Alberta has held non-binding Senate elections before, which previous prime ministers have sometimes heeded the advice of, but those were all held prior to the Supreme Court's ruling. This time, there may be a court challenge to Alberta's Senate election. Jason Kenney argues that the 2014 ruling only applies to the federal government and not provincial governments holding Senate elections, although many legal scholars disagree. As Jason Markusoff, writing for Maclean's magazine, put it, Alberta may be holding multi-million-dollar democratic exercises to create a list of Albertans who are ineligible to become senators. But, setting aside the difficulty of Canada's constitutional amending process, should we be trying to amend the Constitution so that senators are elected? In the 1980s, there was a proposal for a Triple E Senate, elected, effective, and equal. Electing senators would give them much more authority to amend and even veto bills from the House of Commons. Proponents of an elected Senate argue that elected politicians are more accountable to the people and can be voted out of office if Canadians aren't satisfied with their conduct. Others say that electing senators would defeat the Senate's purpose as a chamber of sober second thought and intensify partisanship. If senators were elected, then Canada could wind up with two legislative chambers controlled by different political parties, resulting in an unproductive, hyper-partisan deadlock. So, what do you think of Canada's Senate? Should it be reformed somehow, or abolished entirely? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, then be sure to subscribe to my channel.